And my name, for everyone who's coming in, is Sarah Hibbs-Ship. I am the Director of Organizational Communications for CSU Strata, and I am here today as the representative from CSU to interview Steve Albers, someone I've now known for more years than I'm almost willing to admit, it seems like. So Steve is the CSO, Chief Science Officer for CTO. Which one, Steve?
CTO.
CTO for Living Inc., which is a startup that started. The idea started at CSU and has since rolled out and is going for everything I can find about it, just absolutely amazingly. And so, Steve, I should, before I get any further into this, thank everybody for coming to the Ask the Expert initiative, which is co-hosted by venture partners at CU Boulder, part of the CCTSI Spark Reach program at CU and us, CSU Strata at Colorado State University are all partners in hosting this event today. But Steve, I'm going to go ahead and start in and let you tell the audience just a little bit about your background, as you will do justice than me reading off the abstract. So,
long and varied is probably the best answer. So hi everybody, thanks for jumping into the podcast. Excited to be here. My name is Steve Albers. I'm the CTO, co-founder, IP attorney, HR rep, let's see what else, facilities manager, general manager of Living Inc. Technologies. So we are a startup of 9 individuals that is down in Berthoud, Colorado. We tell stories with ink, and how we do that is we turn algae into ink and other pigments, and it's a carbon negative ink and a carbon negative pigment, which is a great story for a lot of consumer brands that are looking to decrease their carbon footprint, engage with a larger part of the market that is really interested in eco-friendly products. And we can do that because we turn algae into pigment through intellectual property that we have and a processing step that we do that allows us to use that pigment in inks and tell cool stories. And so we've gotten a lot of traction in commercial markets with consumer brands and using our ink and telling the story with those brands. So we've printed over 300,000 shirts with Nike. We're going to be on 3 lines of Nike shoes next year. We've printed over 6 million boxes. And we're launching a cosmetics line with a group in England next year. We've been doing plastics dyeing. We're dyeing fabrics. So we're doing a lot of different things, but it's a cool time to sort of be in materials startup space because things are changing and they haven't for a long time. And so it's kind of a cool place to be. My history is probably the long and varied part. Really tight association with CSU, got a bachelor's in plant disease in the 2000s, early 2000s, 2000 exactly, and got my PhD in cell molecular biology at CSU as well, and graduated in 2016. Started the company in 2014 with my co-founder, Scott Fulbright. He's a PhD in cell molecular biology as well, so we met there and kind of ran into each other in the halls, constantly talking about things we could do that were outside of academia, because neither of us are really the academic type. So we kind of just gravitated to each other and started the company while we were at CSU. Did a bunch of pitch competitions, did a Kickstarter campaign, business plan competitions, and SBIRs from the Department of Energy as well as National Science Foundation. And we actually have revenue too. So we are hitting close to $500,000 in revenue this year, which is really pre-revenue, but yeah, exciting. So I'm glad to be here. I'm sure we'll get into a lot of different things. I think that's a pretty good overview. I actually did work, I was colleagues with Sarah too. So I moonlighted as a an employee at CFT Ventures, now Strata, while I was getting my PhD and while we were starting Living Inc. And so, yeah, I've hustled in a lot of different places on a lot of different projects. But yeah, full time at Living Inc. and excited to be here.
Thank you, Steve. That's way better than I could have ever done. So I very much appreciate that. I want to start out talking a little bit, since we have folks in the audience who are likely faculty and or postdocs, research students who have innovations that they might be interested in exploring, or sort of what this really means in an academic setting. You were doing your PhD in, if I remember correctly, using algae potentially as biofuels. Is that, or around in that general sort of concept? Can you talk about sort of what that was like, and where your light bulb moment was, where maybe you thought about algae in a different way to kick off, right? The idea of maybe algae could be ink instead of a biofuel.
Yeah, sure. So, yeah, good question. So both Scott and I came to CSU after we had sort of careers other places. So I was a school teacher down in Denver before I came back and got my PhD, and then never was really interested in the science for science sake purely. I always had this sort of bend on what could we make, what could we do, and so my PhD was with a biological engineer. And what I was looking at was control mechanisms, understanding and building control mechanisms, genetic control mechanisms in algae. And so to figure out if we were turning genes on or turning genes off, we thought about it for a while, and we came up with this idea to use color pigments, so carotenoids, to be able to understand how to turn genes on and off, how to manipulate the genome, how to insert genes, how to delete genes, and the impacts associated with it. So it's a lot of metabolic engineering, but the reason I really wanted to do that was because I was just always so interested in producing something from biological systems. And so I sort of had that bend. Scott and I, just gravitated to each other. We must have had about 100 different ideas before Living Inc. came up. And Living Inc. was sort of a hack job on a couple different things. So Scott's grandma was tenaciously driven to get good greeting cards from her grandson. And so Scott would panic around time when he had to get greeting cards for his grandma. And so, yeah, he was actually at like a King Soopers, and then he went to Whole Foods, and he went to like 4 different places, and he bought a greeting card for like $15, like a papyrus greeting card. And the story goes that he just sort of standing there and was like, oh my God, we should use what Steve's engineering to make ink for greeting cards. And so we came back to the lab, and we started throwing that idea around, and it wasn't really that as much as it was let's build something that grows. Let's build an ink that grows. So we came up with this idea and started pitching it to folks and sort of refined it there, and just kind of ran off with the concept, not because we thought it was going to be successful. And we've taken some serious pivots from where we started, but because we wanted to learn. We got into this program through the College of Business at CSU. I don't think it's there anymore. But it was helping us try to, refine this process. And one of the things that we got was a business coach, and we had no earthly business having a business coach. We didn't have a company, we didn't have a business. And the business coach figured that out really quickly. And it was sort of, they were like, hey, meet with this guy. So we did. And what it ended up being was sort of, okay, so what are your goals between the two of you? And you guys should have these conversations to make sure if you start a company that you at least know what you want to do and what each of you wants to do. And it was really valuable because Scott and I talked a lot about that. And what we decided to try to do while we were starting this company was learn as much as we could about this space, right? Taking cutting edge science innovation and moving it out into the commercial marketplace. And so, we had a lot of wins, we had a lot of losses, but every loss, was like, did we learn something? And every win was, okay, did we learn something? And how do we continue to grow the company? And that part was really important, was this concept of just being hungry to learn something new. And he's got sort of a drive. He worked for a startup that was using algae to make fuels. And I just loved biofuels. I was just enthralled with it because I love cars, I love mechanical things. I'm a builder. And so we just were like, well, let's try to make something out of biology, and let's try to learn through this process. And that's where it really came from. And it's evolved, of course. And I think we've done a pretty good job of trying to listen to the markets to really understand what we need to do, instead of coming with an technology and trying to find a home for it. We somewhat did a little the opposite. We really tried to listen to the markets and understand what we needed to do to solve problems in the markets. And that's I think one of the things that's really tough for a lot of academicians is, you focus your life on really cool innovations within a specific space, and you engineer living daylights out of it because we love doing hard things, right? Let's just be honest. We're scientists that love hard things, not easy. And then you come with this innovation, you're like, well, who wants this? Because it's super cool. Instead of really listening to the market and trying to say, hey, I understand your problems, and I think I can use sort of what I've learned and my innovation and things like that to solve exactly your problems. And that, I think, is one of the big challenges that I always saw. And, we've run into those problems at Living Ink too, but I think we're super hyper aware of what the market needs. And I think that's really helped us sort of grow and survive, which we are doing today.
So you, in that great discussion, you talk a lot about figuring out what the market needs and listening to the market. And many of the folks that will be listening to this have access to these university resources, whether the new NSF Western I-Core Hub that is being facilitated out of CU Boulder, that CSU is now an affiliate of as well, to have access to all of the NSF I-Core content coming out of that, or the Reach Accelerator that's co-hosted CSU and a bunch of other partners in Innosphere here in Fort Collins, or the NIH I-Core program that is done at CU and Shoots. Can you talk a little bit of, when I started at CSU Strata, CSU Ventures, 5-7 years ago, you all were beginning to build out that I-Core training program in what has now become research to market. And what you learned and how you applied some of those core concepts and the customer discovery exploration to Living Ink, and or helped coach other startups to really sort of learn what you were learning along your journey that you applied?
Yeah, it's a tough question to wrestle down because there's so many different parts. But yeah, like at its core, understanding what the market needs is really important, because there's so many different markets and so many different problems within those specific markets that you try to generalize and just get lost in all the you don't see the nuance, and the nuance is the important stuff. And so, you have to be diligent at doing it. And I think, the most important piece that I think I've learned through all this time. So, I've worked for the Department of Energy in their SBIR and the I-Core and their canonical Energy I-Core. I actually started the Energy I-Core for SBIR program with a colleague of mine. But, what I've learned from all this stuff, not just from teaching, customer discovery, but also applying it to Living Ink and using my resources at Living Ink to understand customer discovery, is that you just have to be willing to do it. You can't expect somebody else to do it. And I think that's the first lesson. I think, what I look for in an innovator that I want to work with and support when I do sort of, that type of support work with startups, is the people who are tenacious, the hustlers in the group. And if you're not, that's okay. You just may be interested in something else. But if you're not a hustler, if you're not like tenaciously driven to try to learn a lot about specific markets, that's, I think, one of the hallmarks of failure, in all honesty, because these markets are dynamic, complex, and evolving, right? I mean, look what's happened over the last 5 years and how you can just name so many different markets that have changed the way that they function. And if you don't know that stuff, you're innovating for something that was 5 years ago, and you're going to be lost. I think that's a really, really important piece to understand. So you got to sort of you got to roll up your sleeves and get the work done. I think that's a really important piece to understanding markets. And then I think, all of the resources that are out there are really important to listen to, because what they're trying to do is really help you understand this process of listening to markets without bias. And that's at its core, it's sort of that's the basics. And the basics are taught universally, whether it's NSF or DOE or state resources, federal resources, university resources, whatever they are. If they're worth, their weight in salt, which, the CU program really is, and the other resources that, we worked on building when I was at CSU Ventures really are, it's about understanding how to listen to the markets without bias. And if you do that, then you're really starting to understand the challenges that you need to approach to solve certain problems, right? And leverage innovation to do that. And you can't quit, with Living Inc., we're constantly learning. I was at a print shop last night, just listening to print operators talk about our ink. And I got a lot of other things I should be doing. But man, the learning is unbelievable. And so you start to understand the complexity of the markets. You start to understand this process of being tenacious and having to get that information yourself. And you understand how to really listen without bias, without like taking in knowledge, filtering it through your own sort of eyes, and then spitting it out in a specific direction. Those are sort of the core components. And I think that's what you have to really think about if you're interested in moving innovations in the marketplace. There's great resources as tech transfer offices are to be able to say, hey, why don't we license the technology instead of pushing towards a startup? But, there's a time and place for startups as well. So, yeah, Sarah, I don't know if that answered the question, but.
Living Inc. had, and you may have had multiple pivots, but one that I know about specifically is going from greeting cards, right? Where you grow ink, and probably one of my favorite Kickstarter commercials of all time in essence. And what did you learn from doing that then had you realize you needed to pivot? Because pivots are hard, right? Like, you have to change things when you realize something's really not going to work.
Yeah. It was interesting. So, okay. So the first product of Living Inc., and Scott hates it when I talk about this because it gets people excited, and we do not sell this product anymore, nor do we work on it. But it was super fun. It was a greeting card that grew over time. And so what we had done is we had figured out how to grow algae in different solutions in different concentrations, and then actually put them into pens and make the pens work to draw onto specific substrates, so paper. So you could draw on a piece of paper, and what you did is you put the piece of paper in a little tiny greenhouse. And you could draw with different types of pens that would grow at different rates. And so imagine getting a greeting card in the mail that says, put me in the window and watch me grow. And you do. You come home the next day and it says a cake is grown on the greeting card. It wasn't there the day before, right? You go to work the next day, you come home that day, and candles have grown on the cake on the greeting card. And the third day it says, happy birthday, Steve, on it. And so it's this interactive card that literally is changing. And what's changing is the algae are growing. And so we did a Kickstarter campaign. You can still see the video. It's, rather hilarious. But, you know, we thought that was super cool. And there was a lot of people who were really excited about that. We actually got Hallmark's R&D team on the phone. And they were like, well, this is really exciting because, you know, they were working with innovations like mechanical paper, which is paper that folds out when you open the greeting card, right? A very technical name for a very simple solution, but those were their types of innovations. And they're always looking for new stuff. And so they got us on the phone and we started talking about it. And they're like, this is great, you know. And one of the logistics folks said, hey, well, how long can it sit in a warehouse? And as a biologist, I was really proud to say, you know, these little organisms can stay in the dark, still survive, and it works. And they were like, great, how about a year? And that was sort of what we started thinking about. You know, I was like, well, this is going to be tough. And so we got into this pitch competition, and it was for the Department of Energy. It was a regional competition. We were down at CU Boulder. And this was, I don't know, 2016, 2015. Anyway, so we pitched, this is the regionals of the regionals, essentially. We're like, yeah. And so we pitched the growing greeting card. And it always went off well. People are always like, that's so cool. And we had videos where we were actually showing the time lapse stuff. So we loved playing around. And so it actually worked. We got to the judgment, you know, time. And there's a bunch of students, and we were grad students at the time, sitting in this big auditorium at CU. One of the judges gets up and says, okay, I'm going to start reading everybody's names, getting through to the finals of the regional. Like, okay, it's exciting. And they call our name and we're like, yes, all right, this is great. And the guy looks at us as we're walking up and he says, I honestly don't know why you're here today, but your technology is so cool, we're going to pass you through. And I was like, what? Oh my God. And I just remember looking out over the crowd and just daggers everywhere, right? And Scott and I walked out of there and was like, whoa, what just happened? You know, and it was a really good wake-up call because it was like, well, how are we going to win the next stage if we're pitching a growing greeting card for the Department of Energy? What's the Department of Energy's purpose? Decrease carbon. These growing greeting cards are not decreasing carbon at any rate that anybody's going to care about. And so we started listening to the market. You know, we started listening to our customers. And in that case, you know, DOE was our customer, and it was clear that we were going to go up against some heavy hitters that are doing some cool stuff about decreasing energy usage, carbon usage, and they were going to win. And so this is where we sort of made that pivot and said, okay, so this isn't going to work. We can't go in there and pitch the growing greeting card and actually have a snowball's chance in hell of winning. And so we made that pivot to taking algae and converting it into a black pigment. So it doesn't grow. It grew as algae, so it's using, you know, atmospheric carbon dioxide, and we fix that carbon dioxide into a form where it doesn't go anywhere for hundreds of years in the final pigment product. And so it's a black replacement for petroleum-derived carbon black. But it's scalable and it has impact and it is carbon negative. And so we started thinking about that and we're like, okay, so how are we going to actually build a company? You know, like we could have built a company around the growing greeting card. It would have been hard. Not too many people want to pay $50 for a greeting card, but it would have been doable. But we were like, okay, so let's have bigger ambitions. And part of it was because we started listening to the market, right? Hallmark saying, you know, yeah, it's going to be hard to actually hold on to this stuff. And then DOE saying things. And we were hearing people say sort of the same things. You know, I don't know if this is really investable, things like that. And so we tried to listen to the market as well as we could. And I think we did a good job there, which allowed us to pivot, which allowed us to actually tell a bigger story. And we actually won the regional final and were awarded $50,000, which was a big deal back then for us. And one of the judges came up to us after and said, you know, guys, there's some really good competition here and there's some really cool technologies, but we decided that you guys should win this because you did such a good job of listening to our feedback from the previous rounds. And Scott and I were blown away, which was it was fun because it sort of validated this: listen to your customer, right? Listen to the people who are talking to you, that are holding the purse strings, that are engaged in the market, that are the market. And that was a huge lesson for us. It was a little tough. I mean, we may have pivoted into absolute oblivion, but again, we were sort of saying to ourselves, let's learn as much as we can. Because look, the growing greeting card was cool, but it was the Kickstarter was absolutely insane. We raised $66,000 on Kickstarter and provided 1,000 growing greeting cards. And I have some of the funniest pictures of us just beat up from producing that stuff. So, there was a lot of things that we were listening to. It wasn't just the market, it was the process that we were going to have to go to get that product to market, the cost, price points, the all of the pieces. And I think we did a pretty good job of listening, and then, applying what we knew and applying sort of our tenacity to try to solve the problems.
So one of the things that companies go through that can be a killer, besides having no market, which you and Scott figured out through listening, through extensive customer discovery and constant learning, is lack of a team that will get you to where you need to be to run a potentially successful company. You and Scott, as the co-founders, for quite some time, were the core team. How did you balance or figure out how to build and grow your team, and also segregate your duties so that you were each maximizing your own personal skill sets?
Yeah, that one's probably one of the hardest questions to ask, because building a team and managing a team is some of the hardest things that I've ever had to do in my entire life. So, I have multiple direct reports, and I'll admit it, I'm probably not the best manager in the world, especially because I've never, seen anybody do it and been able to model anybody really that well. I've been in a lot of jobs where I'm still a sole contributor, individual contributor. But it's tough. It really is. So Scott and I think, have a lot of patience for each other. We're just a good team. Scott's great to work with. I'm, I think, a decent team player. And that part was important, because there was pretty stressful. We really had to sort of be able to look each other in the eye and say, are we going to do this? And we both need to sort of contribute equally. And so that was tough. You got to find the right founder. You got to find the founders who are, have the tenacity to keep pushing. And you can't do it by yourself, that's for sure. And then, finding the team is really tough, especially as you evolve. So I think some of the things that we've seen in our past is team members sometimes fit your business model. And then as your business model evolves, they sometimes don't fit. And then you got to find new team members. It's pretty hard to sort of hold on to the same team members forever and expect them to be really, really effective at their job. And that's a hard one to say, because I can't stand letting people go. I don't really love hiring people. It's tedious, hard work. And sometimes really depressing, I tend to like people, and letting them go isn't a good feeling. Anyway, and what I think has really helped us sort of evolve in that position, especially as of late, is to go from this position of hiring people that are just tenacious to hiring people that are very tenacious but understand a specific job that you have for them. So we have been really good in the past at learning from our own mistakes. It's sort of just fun. You try it and you learn, right? And that gets you certain distance. But as you really start to get into the marketplace, you need experts. And one of the things that I think we've really started to listen to is, go out and find the experts that have already done something like you're trying to do, and have them come in and bring the knowledge set that they learned at other institutions, other companies, other whatevers. And that has been really important for us. So it's really start to hire for not just tenacity, but skill set and exposure. And, if they're in the right area of interest, that's good enough. They don't have to be, the exact fit, as long as they're tenacious. But if they can bring the skill sets that they've learned at other places to our company, that's important. And that's been a really big deal. So at first it was all about, spit and vinegar, and that was it. And it was as hard as Scott and I could work is where we were going to go. And then we started hiring people that were sort of like us. And now we're hiring people that aren't like us, right? So that aren't the scientists, that are the managers, that aren't the CEO, but are the ink chemists, the material scientists. The people that don't look like us. They're still tenacious, but they don't have the same skill set. And so that's been a really big deal in terms of like finding the right people. But you definitely have to be able to evolve as your business model evolves. And that's a pretty important thing.
Thinking about that and running your business, coming out of a university, you had, while you were in part of the university as an employee at CSU Strata, CSU Ventures, you had access to free educational initiatives potentially, and or some business coaching assistance. Once you fully left the university system, how do you find those, or how important is it to find those types of opportunities, although now you may have to pay for them, and for that advice, instead of it being free and accessible when you're inside the university?
Yeah, I don't know. I think during the entire time that we had, access to university resources or not, more about the people that we found that we could work with, that would help us understand specific challenges that we were running into. And so, it's essentially finding the right advisors, finding the right folks, being exposed to the right folks, going to conferences, going to trade shows, going to customer visits, things like that, working with industry experts, using LinkedIn. It's really about finding the people that I think can be really helpful. And that's just a game of chance. And you can put your foot on the scale to make, give yourself better chances for sure. But it really is, it's about finding the right people that can help you out. And, I think what working at CSU Ventures allowed us to have was just a bigger network, which was really exciting, right? Talking to the right people, talking to people who've done it, getting that type of exposure and banging heads into the same wall with somebody was always really valuable. And I think that's where there's a ton of value. And I think that kind of goes back to that comment of, learn from others as fast as you can. You can learn from yourself a ton. You can just, you can do the same things everybody else has done, essentially recreate the wheel, but finding the right network, I think, is big. And so, moving from the university and not having that network anymore, you got to go out and find it. You got to curate it. You have to spend time going out and just talking to people. And scientists are notoriously bad with people skills, in my opinion. And it's not probably because you can't develop it. It's just that you're focused, you're using your brain power to do something else. But you got to sort of you got to tell yourself, I got to go to that luncheon. You got to tell yourself, I got to go to that free event. And as you start doing that, you'll start gravitating to the people that will really make an impact. And that's important. So it may take a little more effort as you come out of the university, but I think it's really just about finding the right people. And the university can give you that sort of jump start. It can give you access to more of a network, You just have to try to figure out what you're looking for. And once you start doing that, you just leverage the network until you find the right people that are really helpful. And I think that's important. So, I guess the short answer is you just have to work harder to find that network once you're out of university.
So I'm trying to think. We've gone through several of the questions that were in the list that I sent you in advance. And if anybody who is part of the attendees would like to ask a question, please feel free to drop it in the Q&A or in the chat. We'd be happy to take them. I am curious. You talked about coming in to grad school, and both you and Scott, were really interested in creating something, making something, having something beyond just learning while you were learning. When in the inception of Living Inc. and all of the work that you were doing, when did you realize that it was really a solid shot, and maybe a little bit less hope and fingers crossed, and like that this could really happen, and taking it like your full-time job now, right? Like that step from I need a separate full-time job to provide for my family and all of the things that I need, to know this is my actual full-time job, and I'm all in.
I'm still waiting for that. Tongue in cheek, sort of, I know, but yes. I think really, so we raised a bunch of money through Kickstarter and pitch competitions and things like that, but that wasn't really a bunch of money. We got an NSF phase 1. The phase 2 was a pretty big deal. We got a phase 2B. When we got the phase 2B, we got state funds too. So, we were accumulating a decent amount of cash and, experience associated with it. But what I think really has spoke volumes about sort of the opportunity is when you get other people to give you their money. And so going out and getting dilutive equity, so raising investment from private individuals that aren't friends, families, and that's, I think, a really important piece. Like I said, we really like listening to the market and trying to get other perspectives. And that's just another perspective on, you guys seem to be doing something here that needs to get done. The market seems to be interested, and you guys are the right mix. And so it was pretty fun to be able to go out and get a seed round. So we raised $1.5 million in a seed round. And now we're trying to raise a Series A, and I think it's going pretty well. It's daunting. It's daunting to say the least, but it is going well. It's great feedback. It's given us the opportunity to really sort of evolve the story and understand the space of dilutive equity. And that's a real big component. It's also a big component that we've used a lot is getting customers to actually use the product, right? And so you get this validation from the marketplace where the market is actually using the product, right? So you can go and find Nike shirts that have our ink. You can go and find Marmot sweatshirts that have our ink. You can buy you're going to be able to buy a lot of other things with our ink on it really soon. Shoes, which is going to be really cool. I think we're going to get our logo on some shoes at some point in time, which is really different for an ingredient brand. And that gives you sort of that sort of, hold on, somebody is using it because they need it, right? And they need it for a certain reason. And that's a really big deal. I think a lot of times we get these sort of false positives, right? Where it's like, well, I convinced someone at the Department of Energy to give us a phase 1 SBIR. Okay, but is the market really interested, right? And the DOE and NSF could be rather speculative at times, which is their job, right? And that's good. But they're not the market. when it really comes down to it. They're not a consumer market. And being able to see your product on consumer products, consumer goods is pretty cool. And I think that's where you really start to get that validation. So I would say, dilutive equity is a huge validator, as well as sort of market adoption, whether it's small or big. That was huge. And we tried to play that game a lot. We still do. We play this sort of MVP model of development, this minimally viable product model where we're throwing ink at groups, and it's okay, we can use it, but it sort of validates that there is a market need, right? And then we have to, work our tails off to continue to develop and make it better and better. And we do, which is really exciting. But yeah, seeing the products in the market is huge. And that has given us sort of a lot of impetus to be able to say to people that ask us, is there really a market need? Are you making something people want? Excuse me. And you don't have to say, yeah, and I'm going to convince you. When you have products in the market, you just point to them and you just say, what do you think they think? And that's really powerful. I mean, it is. It's really powerful. Like now, the big game is getting that traction and becoming sticky with our product. But it's super powerful. And somebody's like, well, does it work on boxes? And I can say, well, we've printed over 5 million boxes with it. There's not really much of an argument, right? Nobody's going to buy 5 million boxes worth of ink if it doesn't work, right? Well, will it stick to shirts and does it look good? Well, go buy a Nike shirt. And you tell me, and there's a lot that goes into that, but still it's unbelievably convincing for people to say, so the biggest apparel brand in the world is interested in using your ink. There must be something there. And that, I think, is where the real power comes from when you're like, I don't have to convince you anymore. There's a lot of other folks that are on the team that are willing to convince you, and I don't have to do it.
So you started out in that very beginning of getting your MVP, and I remember the day you actually brought to work the Bedrock sandals printed box. And how is it different then with those very early trying to get traction in a couple of concepts with some of those very early adopters versus working with Nike, for example, because they're not a small company. So
right. Yeah, well, it really comes down to understanding sort of your market verticals, the different players in the market, and how. And this gets back to that complexity question, right? Of how complex is the market you're going into and how much do you understand that market? So, Bedrock Sandals is a different company than Nike, for sure, right? And they function very differently. And if you don't understand, and we don't fully understand Nike, I don't think their own employees understand how that company, because it's just so big. But understanding them as much as you can helps you come up with strategy. And that strategy has to be very nuanced and very focused. So, our engagement with Bedrock Sandals was hugely different than what it is with Nike, because they're different customers with different needs. And if you don't do your customer discovery well, you're not going to understand that. And we didn't for a long time, right? And so we kind of banged around and played all these games, and we still are. But being able to understand how different value propositions for different customer segments within a specific market vertical is hugely powerful. And in different markets, it's very different. So we're in consumer goods. We're a materials company. That's very different than a pharma company. But the story sort of is the same, right? Understand the market, understand the needs within that market, understand the value propositions with specific customer segments within that market. And you start to be able to say, I understand how I need to develop this company to meet those needs. And so, getting together with Bedrock was a lot of hustle. And that's where the majority of that came in and was really valuable. Getting, traction within Nike is not going to just be hustle. it's really understanding that space and spending a ton of time of really trying to dive deep on what specific groups within Nike need and want, and how that bleeds over into other pieces. So it's really about, I mean, it comes down to that real basic sort of customer discovery and doing the work yourself, and not using bias to understand different stakeholders within specific market verticals and understanding the impacts they have. I mean, it's just all of this customer discovery stuff that just comes back to it. You know, it's just a bunch of knowledge. So yeah, but they're very different. I mean, you're totally right. And you got to leverage them for different needs. You know, like, is Bedrock actually meeting the burn rate for Living Ink? No. But Nike, yes. And how do you leverage those different opportunities? Why are you leveraging them? And how do you put that into the business model? Like, all of that knowledge sort of like boils up to this business model. And at times it can be very different for different groups you're working with. So it's a very interesting sort of nuance laden dynamic of understanding different players within a specific market.
We have about 13 minutes left. Is there anything that you, life lesson wise, the one thing you want somebody to take away from this, that you want to share? And then I have a sustainability motivation question for you.
I'm more interested in the second. What is a sustainability motivation question?
Yeah.
One takeaway? Yeah, find somebody you want to work with and understand why they're doing it and understand why you're doing it. That's a huge, huge part. You know, Scott and I, I think knew each other pretty well before we started this, and knew we got along pretty well, and liked hanging out with each other and spending time with each other, because, as you start companies, you turn into sort of a hermit because you just work all the time. And because you're not going to make a lot of money. So many side gigs, I can't even tell you. Work unbelievable amount of hours and spend a lot of time with Scott and our other employees. And if you don't work with people you really like, in the end of the day, you're not going to want to do it. And that stuff's really important. So I would start at the basics and say that you got to find somebody you want to work with if you're really interested in starting a company from, hard science.
Awesome. So sustainability motivation question. Your ink is carbon neutral, and
negative.
Carbon negative, right? Even better than carbon neutral. That's and right. What does that really mean to the future of ink and how we use our resources, how we manufacture it? And what does that mean to you as a company in something you may truly believe in as a foundation of environmental responsibility or sustainability?
Yeah, I mean, well, first off, I'd say I definitely truly do believe that. There's a lot of different motivations for starting a company, and you got to make sure it's diverse. It can't just all be about cash. It can't just all be about impact. I think it's got to be really sort of diverse in its vision and in its opportunity, and that I think is important. I got 2 little kids. I don't want to contribute to this place being worse, and I think overall this place is much, much better than we saw it 15 years ago, 10 years ago, 5 years ago. We're constantly doing better and better things, but it takes workers to do that. It takes hustlers to get that done. And so it's cool to be a part of that community, first off, of people trying to get cool stuff done and innovate and being scientists and using our science knowledge to actually come up with consumer products that people want and that are really a net positive for the environment. And ink isn't a huge part of really any product, but it's all over the place. Pigment is all over the place. I mean, every time I give this conversation, I just say, stop for a second, look around the room. What you see is black, is petroleum derived black. So the paint on sunglasses, the the plastic molding that's black, ink on shirts, cosmetics. It's all petroleum derived or mineral derived product. And we get to change that story, and we get to use renewable biologicals to do that. And that's fun, because that makes more sustainable world a world that will continue and give everybody a chance to do cool stuff, right? And that's fun. I think it's could it be better? Of course it could be better. Could it be worse? It could definitely be worse. And that's what we're replacing. And so it's fun to be a part of that community, a community of people who are trying to make an impact, trying to use science, trying to use biology to make an impact. I think that part is really important. All of those things help motivate me on a daily basis, because, it's tough. I mean, we try to estimate the amount of work that the C-suite does right now. And each one of us is probably at, 70 hours a week. And that's not a ton of fun at times, but if you have the motivation for all of these different components, of growing a really cool business, of learning this process, of actually making a carbon negative product that is a drop-in replacement for a petroleum derived product that's available today, that can be used today, that can be scaled today, is cool, because you get to start to be more of the leader in that space instead of, just purely a follower, which is also really fun. So I think there's just a ton of answers to that question. It's not just the environmental, it's all of the above that make it fun and persistent in my life, to the point of where I'm willing to put up with some crazy stuff to actually do it. So.
Awesome. Well, I do not have any additional questions for you, and we're almost out of time as it is. And so unless you have something else you would really like to share, I'm happy to say thank you. And I really appreciate you being here with us today.
Yeah, of course. Yeah. Great to see you. Glad that I can sort of contribute to some programs that I worked on, and yeah, glad that everybody was able to jump on. If anybody's ever interested in talking more, always more than willing to do that. You can find me on LinkedIn and not really any other social media, but get a hold of Sarah. She's got my email. Always willing to talk. Love science, love innovation, love pushing innovation into commercial markets with some cool science. So always down for the conversation. So thanks for having me, Sarah.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Steve. Have a wonderful day.
Okay, you as well. See ya.
Bye.